Welcome back to Deconstructing Directing. I'm Andrew Robler, the founder and archivist here. Over the course of Act 4, we've explored the director's relationship to text, how to collaborate with playwrights, how to respect absent authors, how to integrate dramaturgy, and how to navigate ethics and copyright. Now, in this final scene of Act 4, we turn the mirror fully on ourselves as we explore how our staging choices can fundamentally alter a script. That's right, we don't have to change a word to change a play. Every time we move an actor, pause a beat, shift a light cue, or alter a gesture, we're changing something. That's the strange power of directing. We are always interpreting, even when we think we're just staging. The way we arrange bodies, rhythm, and attention tells the audience what to believe about the story, and sometimes those visual or emotional choices contradict the very words being spoken. A whispered line delivered standing 3 feet away from someone means one thing. The same line delivered nose to nose means something entirely different. Both might be true to the text, but they're not the same truth. Stage performance is always an act of interpretive authorship, and the director's hand is part of the language, whether acknowledged or not. So as always, let's get specific about what we mean when we say staging. In this context, I use the word staging to refer to the choices made about how the show is physicalized, meaning the arrangement of actors, props, set, lighting, sound projections, and any other design elements to tell the story. Blocking, which refers to the movement of actors around the space, is only one part of staging. So let's start by exploring why staging isn't what happens after analysis, it is analysis. It's the moment when interpretation leaves our head and starts breathing. When we block a scene, we're not just organizing movement, we're declaring what we think the play believes about power, love, fear, gender, time, truth, and consequence. And this isn't metaphorical, it's literal. The audience reads meaning from space and tempo the same way they read it from dialogue. If the playwright's words are the score, the director's staging is the performance of that score, inflected, embodied, and specific. The meaning isn't in the notes alone, it's in how they're played. The question isn't if we're interpreting, but how intentionally and consciously. The director's work, then, is not to avoid interpretation, but to do it on purpose. One of the most popular tools for understanding how staging creates meaning is the viewpoints method, developed originally by Mary Overly in the 1970s, and then reimagined by Tina Landau and Anne Bogart in 2005. This later version expands the original 6 viewpoints into 9, grouped under 2 broad categories, space and time. Space encompasses 5 viewpoints. Architecture, the physical environment, the space and whatever belongs to it or constitutes it, including permanent and non-permanent features. Spatial relationship, the distance between objects on stage, one body in relation to another, to a group, or to the architecture. Topography, the movement over landscape, floor pattern, design, and colors. Shape, the contour or outline of bodies in space, the shape of the body by itself in relation to other bodies or in relation to architecture. Lines, curves, angles, arches, all stationary or in motion. Gesture, meaning behavioral gesture, realistic and belonging to the physical world as we observe it every day, and expressive gesture, abstract or symbolic gesture expressing an inner state or emotion. It's not intended as a public or realistic gesture. Time encompasses 4 viewpoints. Tempo, how quickly or slowly something happens on stage. Duration, how long an event occurs over time, how long a person or group maintains a particular movement, tempo, gesture, etc. before it changes. Kinesthetic response, a spontaneous reaction to emotion that occurs outside of oneself, an instinctive response to an external stimulus. And repetition, both internal repetition, repeating a movement done with one's own body, and external repetition, repeating a movement occurring outside one's body. We'll explore these viewpoints more in a future act, all about staging and blocking, but for now, let's look at some snapshots of how these viewpoints might impact a production. In Romeo and Juliet, the famous balcony scene is almost always staged with Juliet above Romeo, signifying that she is the archetypal angel, distant and idealized. But imagine staging that scene with her still separated from Romeo, but now below him in some way. Then she becomes grounded, human, the initiator of risk. The lines that she's saying are identical, but the staging rewrites the power dynamic of the central story. Or what if they're on the same level, but separated by great distance? How does that change the narrative? Or imagine Antigone kneeling before Creon, becoming a martyr and a supplicant. If we stage her standing level with him, she becomes an opponent and equal. Or even more profoundly, imagine she exists on a platform above. She's divine judgment. One body's verticality reframes an entire philosophy of law and morality. Finally, imagine the iconic moment of Nora's departure in A Doll's House. Ibsen's stage directions simply say that she goes out through the hall, followed a moment later by the words, "The sound of a door shutting is heard from below." If that door closes softly and in private, the exit might feel like a loss. But if the door is visible to Helmer and slammed loudly behind her, that same exit becomes a revolution. So why is it important to talk about this? And why are we talking about it in an act that's been focused entirely on the director's relationship with text? The reality is that every director has an interpretive fingerprint, a pattern of habits, images, and rhythms that reveal what we believe about human behavior. But when we work with someone else's words, we have to be aware of what our instincts do to their meaning, because staging isn't neutral, and neither are we. It can be helpful to ask ourselves some questions to probe our self-awareness and understand our own perspective, such as, what does my staging assume about this world? What values are embedded in my visual storytelling? What do my choices say about who matters, who leads, and who watches? If we don't take the time to get curious about our own approach, we risk directing on autopilot, and that sets us up for failure when we need to be able to explain our thinking to our collaborators. It's the reason why so many directors are better at recognizing what they don't like than what they do. And in the case of working with text, the most dangerous kind of interpretation is the kind we don't realize we've done. Every directorial choice carries meaning, but not every director takes responsibility for it. We've all seen productions that look beautiful but betray their own text, where the aesthetic takes precedence over the story's integrity, or where cleverness replaces specificity. Those moments don't happen because someone made a bad choice. They happen because someone made an unexamined one. On that note, let's explore some broad interpretive categories that might be helpful as a starting point for understanding our own interpretive actions in staging. We might call the first category faithful interpretation. This interpretive approach seeks to realize the playwright's intent through fresh embodiment, honoring the original context while translating emotional truth to today's audience. I was in a production of Dangerous Liaisons in college that I would argue fell under this category. The costumes, scenic design, and blocking were all as true to the period as possible, but the director made it clear that she wanted it to feel immediately relevant to modern audiences in the way that we portrayed the characters. The second category might be called transformative interpretation, which reframes the text to illuminate new ideas or relevance. When we change the era, setting, or casting concept to expose buried themes in the text, we are working in this category of interpretation. Most productions of Shakespeare that focus on changes to the setting, for example, setting A Midsummer Night's Dream in the 1980s, but leave the majority of the themes and story intact, would fall under this category. Gender changes to characters might also fall under this category when done out of necessity, because you didn't have enough of one gender show up to auditions, for instance, rather than intentionality. One example of this might be the 2024 off-Broadway revival of the musical Cats, that didn't change any of the text or lyrics, but completely reimagined the story as not being about literal cats with fur, but instead the cool cats of the New York queer ballroom scene. The final category is one we might call critical interpretation, which is when we deliberately rework or repurpose the text to critique its assumptions. This might include gender-flipped casting that is intentional and being used to explore a new perspective on the text, such as casting a woman to play Macbeth as a woman, or setting changes that are intended to explore themes that were likely not intended or considered by the playwright, such as when director Tara Moses helmed a production of Othello at the South Dakota Shakespeare Festival in 2022. As Robert Hubbard says in his HowlRound article about the work, Moses' indigenous futurism vision of Shakespeare's play about race and revenge took place in the year 2176 in fully restored Indian territory immediately after the final battle in the War of Restoration. As we soon surmise, Native American revolutionaries successfully disestablished the United States by uniting with Black liberation forces. Together, they fully restored tribal sovereignty of the land. None of these approaches are inherently better or worse than the others. What matters is awareness and transparency, that we can name which we're doing and why. A director who calls a radical reinterpretation faithful isn't being bold. They're being ignorant or, at the worst, dishonest. So if we want to work in the second or third categories of interpretation, if we want to stage a departure, whether major or minor, how can we approach that goal with reckless kindness? Here are some guiding questions that can help. Who gains or loses agency from this choice? In other words, whose story gets louder and whose gets quieter? What cultural or political weight does this image carry now? Even neutral staging means something in 2025. Am I clarifying, complicating, or contradicting the playwright's argument? Would the playwright recognize the heartbeat of their play here? Who am I serving with this interpretation? The play, the audience, or my ego? Applied here, reckless kindness means directing with accountable imagination. It's bold enough to reimagine, humble enough to respect, and clear enough to name its choices. Reckless kindness asks you to remember that every text was born from someone's labor, and every reinterpretation happens inside a web of cultural context. To direct ethically is to act with empathy for both the creator and the community. You don't need to avoid risk. You just need to make sure that the risk serves something bigger than your aesthetic satisfaction. In Scene 7, we talked about the role of a dramaturg, and this is one of the places where working with a dramaturg rather than being your own dramaturg can be incredibly valuable. Having an external perspective to reflect back the choices we're making directorially can be very helpful, especially when we are working in transformative or critical modes of interpretation. They can hold up the mirror so that your innovation doesn't They can hold up the mirror so that your innovation doesn't slide into appropriation and your critique doesn't turn into erasure. Because interpretation without reflection becomes invention without accountability, and invention, when unchecked, can become violence, especially when the story belongs to a culture or a community, not your own. The text is not a fixed artifact. It's an evolving organism that survives through interpretation. Every production feeds or starves it. Every choice becomes part of its DNA. When we direct, we're not keeping a play alive out of nostalgia. We're ensuring its continued evolution, one that keeps it relevant, resonant, and real. Each new staging adds another layer of meaning, and no two productions can ever replicate the same organism. That's the beauty of theater. It resists fossilization. And remember, the relationship between director and text isn't one way. As we shape the play shapes us. We learn from its architecture, its rhythms, contradictions, and silences. We inherit the playwright's questions and discover new ones of our own. And we begin to see our own patterns of meaning more clearly, what we emphasize, what we neglect, and what we resist. It's the quiet, personal side of directing, the way each text rewires our artistic DNA. By the time you close one show, you're not the same artist who started it. And that's exactly as it should be. This is one of the reasons deconstructing directing exists, because so much of directing is invisible. Audiences rarely know how much of what they see was your doing, be that the gestures you drew, the choices you questioned, or the balance you held between imagination and integrity. But they can feel whether the work honors something living or embalms something dead. And that choice, made again and again, one rehearsal at a time, is what turns directing from simple translation into art. Well, we've reached the end of Act 4. As always, this content is truly and completely 100% free to you and will always be as long as I can help it. That said, if you find it helpful and are able to support it financially, please consider joining my Patreon, which will allow you to set up a small monthly donation and earn fun perks like stickers and more for helping to support this project financially. Even just $5 a month makes a huge difference. I'll see you again soon. Until then, I challenge us all to be recklessly kind.